Just that the things that they were wanting to do, the affliction, the suffering, that wouldn't be abundant. If we think about it, the blessing of God is really the greatest thing that any of us could ever enjoy. The goodness that it brings to our lives. And so the psalmist prayed that none of this goodness would be given to those who hated Israel. At least not while they were still haters of God. Then Psalm 130. So this psalm, again, the author is unknown. The reason that it was written is also unknown. In verses 1 through 6, it talks about the mourning over sins, the pleading for mercy and expressing deep conviction of sin. But it also talks about the trust in God as the only hope for a sinner. And as such, it would represent all of us and all of those that have been convicted of their sin, crying out for mercy. In verse 1 it says, "Out of the depths I have cried to you, O Lord." And the word depths here is translated to mean deep. And it's only used 3 other times within Scripture. When it's talking about the ocean, when it's talking about a pit or a valley. It's not talking about, the depths when, we break a nail. Or the depths when we, maybe our favorite TV show is canceled. It's not talking about some shallow thing, but it's talking about that depth where we are so sorrowful for our sin, where we're brought to that place of recognition that there's this deep affliction or distress because of our sin. And that's what the psalmist is doing. He's crying out from such depths of sorrow, and he's calling upon the Lord, knowing that the Lord hears his cries. And though at times, and perhaps we've been in that same place of kind of looking up and saying, is there anybody up there? Feeling all alone, feeling that nobody hears. Yet, we need to be reminded that God is always ready, He's always willing, and He's always able, in the depths of our sorrow, to come to our aid, to bring comfort, and extend forgiveness. But first we have to admit, we have to cry out. We can't blame shift. We can't, as Eve did, the serpent deceived me, and I ate. So in essence, she's saying, the serpent, by the way, God, which you made, so it's not really my fault. It's the serpent, and you made him, so it's kind of, you guys are going to have to deal with that one. But then Adam was a little more blunt about it. He was a little more straightforward. The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree and I ate. That's a lot of nerve. Isn't it convenient when we have somebody to blame for our sin? But not to worry, if there's nobody around, we can always look to the world and they'll slap an ism on the end of it, so it's not our fault either. Thus, so many never cry out. Why should they? It's not my fault. It's the way I was born. If they're even willing to recognize that it is sin. Yet the psalmist here, he recognized his fault. He recognized his sin. And you can hear this in the way that he cries out to the Lord. He cries out in anguish. In verse 2 it says, Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my voice of my supplications. This is a prayer of a broken man, of one earnestly pleading and asking, God, don't turn away from me. Don't disregard my cry. And those times where we are, so broken and crying out to the Lord, maybe kind of few and far between. But in all honesty, that's the way the Lord wants us every single day. But as life goes along and not a lot of turmoil in our lives, is there really a need to cry out in that way? I can remember distinctly a few circumstances of being so broken and crying out to the Lord, just feeling like a little baby, just absolutely helpless. And Lord, I need you. And as I was going through this, the Lord is just, I want you like that every day. I don't want you to be dependent upon yourself, on your abilities. But every single day, I want you to cry out in this manner. And see, the psalmist here, he recognizes his need because he recognizes his sin. And in verse 3 it says, if you, Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? He recognized his sin. I can't stand before you, Lord, if you keep track of it the way that an accountant should keep track of money. It talks here about marking the iniquities as just being vigilant and being watchful, not letting anything get past. But, oh, I saw that sin. Oh, and that one right there. And I'm marking them all down. And the psalmist says, who could stand? Because as Isaiah 53:6 says, it says, all we like sheep have gone astray. Sometimes we would wish maybe that, well, God is more like June Cleaver. Anybody here watch Leave It to Beaver? I saw an episode the other morning, and it reminded me of this. Because, see, we would like God to be like this. And in a way, I guess it is. But Ward was sitting at his desk, and he's going through the checkbook, and he's balancing the checkbook, and he's paying bills and so forth. And June comes in and says, oh, you're balancing the checkbook. Are you done? And he says, well, almost. He says, I've got everything balanced except for this. There was a check written here for $8.68, and I have no idea what it's for. And June says, oh, well, that was from last month. When I balanced the checkbook, I was $8.68 off, and I couldn't figure it out, so I just wrote a check for that amount, and then I tore it up. Well, in a way, that's what God does. If he were to scrutinize everything, say, hey, nothing's getting past me. But yet he says, yeah, I see you're short. It's not jiving here. It's not right. And so that's what the psalmist says. Who could stand if he were to do that? No one could stand. There would be no acquittals. And so the psalmist is implying here, he doesn't come right out and say it, but he is implying his guilt. He knew that he was a sinner, and he recognized his depravity. And he knew he couldn't stand without God's grace. How many think that they can stand before a righteous God apart from his grace, based upon what I did, what I gave? None. Though God sees all the iniquities of the psalmist, he had an expectant hope that God would deal with him on the basis of mercy and grace. And in verse 4 it says, but there is forgiveness with you that you may be feared. So the psalmist is relying on that forgiveness. In various places in the Bible, that same word is used for propitiation or reconciliation or pardon. And he recognizes that it is only the pardon that would allow him to stand. That God has reconciled him. That he chose to do it that way. And there is no plan B. There is no other way. And when we have full recognition that what God has done, and by his choosing, in the way that he has chosen to forgive us, how that creates in us a heart for worship. To come and to truly worship, not because we have to, not compelled, not trying to check off a box, but because we want to, because we recognize what it is that He has done. And so the psalmist, perhaps in that time where there has been a sin that's been committed, that time where you feel that separation from God, you don't feel that closeness anymore. And it's in this place in verse 5 where the psalmist says, I waited for the Lord, my soul waits, and in His word I do hope. It's in this state of distress. It's in this place where just the conviction of his sin is upon him. And notice a couple of things here, that the psalmist, he's in this state of waiting, but the waiting is with hope. It's with that assurance. It's brought to mind here that, we can use the word hope in various ways. Sometimes when I'm sitting on the ice, staring at a little 6-inch hole, I'm hoping. I'm hoping that my tip of my rod is going to start going up and down. But the hope that I have there is not the hope that the psalmist is talking about. See, the only assurance, the only way I could use that same word hope for when I'm out fishing is maybe if I had a stick of dynamite. Then I could use that word assurance that I'm going to get some fish. Or what? Or what? But see, the difference here is that my hope is dashed quite often because those fish just aren't wanting to cooperate. But the psalmist looked to the Lord to intervene on his behalf with a confident expectation, knowing that He was, according to His perfect will. Then God would step in. The second thing that we should notice is where the psalmist placed his hope, that his dependence lied with the Lord and in His word. It wasn't in man's word, it wasn't in man's promises, it wasn't in military, it wasn't in government, but it was in the word of the Lord. In verse 6 it says, my soul waits for the Lord more than those who watch for morning. Yes, more than those who watch for the morning. The idea here is that of a soldier standing guard. And it's more than the soldier waiting and wanting the sun to rise, which certainly would bring some comfort and would bring warmth, possibly if it was cold. But what he was really looking for, he was waiting for what he knew would come in the morning, was that relief, that somebody would come and take his place. As he was there all night on guard, becoming weary, becoming tired, that he knew when morning dawned, it was more than just the sun coming up, but that he would be relieved. And so the psalmist here, he wants that relief, knowing that his sin is going to be dealt with. That reassurance of God's love and His forgiveness for his sin. Verse 7, O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is mercy, and with Him is abundant redemption. So as the psalmist reminds the people of God's character, of the fact that He is a merciful God. And it's from the depths of affliction, of where he's just guilt-ridden, that he's in a state of despair as he's looked to the Lord and he has found mercy. And now, encouraged by the mercy that he received, now he's exhorting the people to remember that we have a merciful God and that we should always trust in Him. That God's mercy and His redemption, that they don't run out. That it abounds. It's not limited. It can't be exhausted. so we can always come before God, knowing that His mercy and His grace are sufficient for all of our needs. In verse 8 it says, "And He shall redeem Israel from all his iniquities." So God will completely deliver Israel from the power, from the pollution of sin. That which would be ultimately accomplished with the finished work on the cross. And this was in the forefront of the psalmist's mind, as it should be the focus of every child of God, that we may be completely and forever delivered from the power and the dominion of sin and death. So as the psalm opened with this earnest plea, this cry from the depths, it now closes with this triumphant hope, knowing that there is deliverance, and that deliverance is eternal. In this last psalm that we're going to go through tonight, 131, says, "The Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor my lips lofty. Neither do I concern myself with great matters, nor with things too profound for me. Surely I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with his mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore." So this psalm was written by David, and it was written, we don't know the exact circumstances, but it's presumed that he wrote it when he was fairly young. And the reason being is that he is being accused of, as it says, of being haughty, of being lofty, of involving himself in great matters that were too profound for him. So he's being accused of kind of sticking his nose in areas where it really doesn't belong, because he's a runt and doesn't really get, what things are about. Sometimes we can think, well, young person really doesn't have the education, doesn't have the wisdom, doesn't have the ability, doesn't have, you fill in, all these things that they lack. But the thing that we so often overlook is, when God's involved in it, and when God has a calling upon somebody's life and has gifted them with wisdom and knowledge, they have the ability to do that which God has called them to do. I mean, we can look at examples with Joseph. He was about the age of 30, which is relatively young to be a governor of a country. And yet that's what he was. We can think of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. And then certainly we don't want to forget Jesus himself when he was found at the temple schooling the teachers of the law. Just being blown away about how does this kid know this stuff? And so that's kind of the circumstance here where David is being accused of these things, of interjecting, of giving advice, of just, hey, this is kind of what I think about things. And we can look at it in hindsight and see what David was. He was a great warrior. He was a great king. He was great in public affairs, and yes, he had his failings, but in these things that he excelled at, we can kind of look at that knowing, well, hey, you don't know who you're dealing with. These guys had no idea of the calling that David had upon his life. And so David comes before the Lord, and he's saying, Lord, this isn't my heart. My heart isn't haughty. My eyes aren't lofty. I'm not concerning myself with matters that I shouldn't be involved in, these great matters. And those are the accusations that are coming against me. Now, David could have, at the same time, being self-deceived. But he's going before the Lord, and he's saying, Lord, I don't believe this is my heart here. And he's just crying out to the Lord. And basically, what he's saying is, Lord, examine me. Are these things true? I don't believe that they are. And so in that, we see a humility in David, that he's willing to put himself there before the Lord. And he goes to the Lord, and it's kind of interesting how the illustration that he uses, he says, like a weaned child with his mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. If you think about a child that hasn't been weaned yet, they have one thing on their mind: food. And I want it, and I want it now. And if I don't get it now, everybody within, I don't know, whatever distance, they're going to know my discontent. But he's saying, that's not how I'm coming to you, Lord. I'm coming to you as a weaned child, one that I'm coming because of that. It's that place of comfort. It's that place of reassurance. I'm not coming as, this crybaby that I want my way. I'm not making a big fuss over all of this. He says, Lord, I'm coming to you, and I'm asking, is this true? He's coming with that sense of humility and asking the Lord, examine me. If you look at this, any time that we've been slandered, or any time that somebody has said something against us that really kind of stung, maybe it was the truth. Either whether it's slander or it's the truth, and they both still sting. What occasion David had here to really just kind of lay into the people. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't give occasion to his flesh. He's saying, Lord, these things are said. I don't think they're true, but I'm coming to you. Examine me. And then he closes, rather than, again, retaliating. Thank God there was no Twitter or Facebook or all that kind of. What does he do? He pronounces a blessing on the Lord. O Israel, hope on the Lord. He exhorts them. Guys, I'm not going to come back at you with these things that you've said against me that I don't feel are true and correct. Hope in the Lord. How that gentle reply turns away wrath. How that should be our heart. I really enjoyed going through these Psalms, because in the midst of everything that's going on, whether it's affliction that's coming against us, whether it's sin, whether it's things being said about me, in all of these things I could relate to him in one way or another, at one time or another. And just really allow the Lord to do a work in a way that I think at times I resist him. And so my prayer here tonight is that, as we come here, that it's not just a Wednesday night that we come because that's what we do on Wednesday night. But as we come here, we come to hear from the Lord. We come to hear from the Lord through his word. We come to hear from the Lord as we spend time in prayer. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to spend some time in prayer. And if the Lord's spoken to you about as the different psalmists related, again, whether it was affliction, whether it's sin, whether it's somebody has said something to you, true or untrue, to be willing to be transparent in this time of prayer, to ask for healing, to ask that the Lord would reveal things that maybe we are not open to at the moment.